Rain glittered on the asphalt like 1,000 small promises that had forgotten how to keep themselves. I saw her before I understood her. Just a shape at the edge of the county road. A German shepherd sitting so straight it looked like she'd been poured there and left to harden. She kept looking at the bend where the road disappeared into trees, ears pricked, jaw tight, as if the next set of headlights might be a miracle arriving on schedule. Each car hushed past with the indifferent whisper of tires on wet stone, spraying her with a fine mist that darkened the fur along her shoulders until she shivered and stood and sat again, refusing to surrender the exact spot where the smell of her people still hung in the ditch grass. I pulled over because some part of me did before the rest could argue. The truck's engine clicked and cooled, my wipers still doing the useless work of loyal hearts, and in the white beam of my headlights, she turned her head not to me but back to the road. I said, "Hey, the way you speak to babies and ghosts and the versions of yourself you want to redeem." She didn't move. She only looked and looked, hope a kind of posture that breaks you to witness up close. The road was a ribbon tied to what she'd lost, and her body was the knot that wouldn't let go. This is how I remember that first night, and how I start telling it to anyone who asks, because beginnings reveal the angles of a heart long before words decide their order. The road never stopped. That's what it felt like to her, I think. The wind carrying a catalogue of smells that meant goodbye, the sound of engines that taught patience to a dog who had never asked to learn it. In the road that wouldn't end, I see her alone in the soft rain, a loyal soldier guarding a post no one will relieve. She waits through the afternoon into the blue, bruised dusk, through the hush that comes before night remembers how to be itself. When I kneel, my knees sink into the ditch, and the cold climbs my bones like ivy. She leans away but not far, tracking the road with the precision of a compass needle. There is a food bowl in the weeds, knocked into its own reflection, a damp blanket snagged on a thistle, the fragile evidence of an intention that failed. The chapter ends not with rescue, but with a quiet stalemate, a man who refuses to leave and a dog who refuses to move. Both of us damp, both of us stubborn, the dark turning the world into a narrower and narrower hallway. In Learning the Language of Quiet, the story shifts from distance to inches. I bring boiled chicken and patience, the only currencies a fearful heart will consider, and I trade them one finger width at a time. She does not take food from my palm. She waits until I place it between us and point my face away, and only then does she crawl forward and make it disappear without sound. We repeat this until we are both breathing slower, until the rain turns from coins to dust. Her collar is a strip of cracked leather stamped with a number that rings no one. I do not name her yet. Names are vows, and I am old enough to know the weight of vows. Instead, I learn her tells how her ears rake back when a diesel engine climbs the hill, how her eyes find mine when thunder stalls in the stomach of the sky. When she finally steps toward the open crate in my truck, it is not surrender but a negotiation. She glances at the bend in the road once more, and then chooses a different kind of waiting. The weight of a leash is about thresholds, the line between outside and in, silence and voice, hunger and trust. At the shelter intake, fluorescent lights flatten the world, and the stainless steel table become a cold river under her paws. She accepts a leash without pulling, then panics when the door clicks shut between us and the road. The vet listens with a stethoscope that chills her skin. He murmurs numbers into the air as if reciting a spell. I sign forms while she watches, eyes the color of a burnt leaf. The first night she won't lie down in the kennel, standing soldier, still until her back trembles. I sleep in a plastic chair beside her with a towel for a pillow, waking each time her breathing changes shape. The smell of disinfectant and fear makes the hours thin. Morning arrives like a glass of water for a throat that forgot it was thirsty. She eats from a slow bowl as if apologizing for wanting. When I say, "Good girl," she flicks an ear, not yet convinced who girl might be now that the world has moved its furniture around. There's a siren night in every rescue story, the one where everything we've been building is asked to hold its own weight. The night of sirens begins with fireworks no one warned the neighborhood about. She is asleep on the shelter blanket, finally snoring in little burrs, When the first crack opens the sky, her body is a fault line, she stands with all 4 feet pointed at different doors. The leash in my hand becomes a suggestion she is trying not to refuse. She finds a window and watches the road again, shaking like an engine stuttering on bad gas. I wrap her in a pressure vest. I build her a den with towels and my jacket. I speak low as if words can sand a rough edge. When the storm and the fireworks learn each other's names and decide to dance, the power flickers, the emergency lighting clicks on, and somewhere a metal bowl skitters across tile like a coin on a bar top. If the story were cruel, she would run then. If the story were easy, she would lean into me and calm. But our story is true, so she paces and returns and paces and returns, each loop shorter, each turn more deliberate, until finally exhaustion does what love wants to claim credit for, and she folds, her chin on my boot, and her eyes, still open, fix on the door. Someone always comes back, is what the last chapter feels like, even before that's quite true. It's in the small things that a home grows. The smell of a house that hasn't learned her yet, the broom that she decides is not a threat, the couch she is allowed to try, and the spot she decides is hers. Not because I say so, but because the light pools there in the afternoon and makes her fur look like a field in late September. She becomes mirror because her gaze is a mirror, because she reflects the road and me and 1,000 small choices back at themselves until they make sense. There are setbacks. Doors that make sounds like leaving, shadows that wear the wrong coat. But the arc is a slow nod from the universe when no one else is looking. The emotional hinge of this chapter is the day she stops looking at the road and starts looking at me to ask, with a lifted paw and that astonishing patience, which way we'll go now. I am not sure why the first night felt like a confession. Maybe because the rain had the manners of a church, and I had run out of reasons to drive past the suffering I recognized. I parked at an angle that made no sense to anyone but me and knelt beside the ditch where she'd selected her post. Up close, she smelled like old fleece and new fear. I knew enough to keep my shoulders soft and my eyes a little to the side. "You're waiting for somebody," I said, and the simple accuracy of it was a kindness that cost nothing. She scanned the mile that was visible and the 1,000 that weren't. Her body was a door held open with all the forts of a child's imagination, a rock, a wish, the belief that the person you love will notice what they forgot and double back. I placed chicken 2 feet away and leaned back until the gravel pressed an imprint into my palms. She took it with a care that was almost a courtesy, then returned to her vigil as if practice could turn wishing into a skill. We built our first truce out of food and distance. A longer wait between pieces turned my presence from interruption to background noise. I spoke about nothing. How the road bent beautifully here. About the red-tailed hawk who owned the telephone pole. About my sister's porch light that burned out because no one likes the ladder. My voice made a room around us, thin, walled but real. When I moved, I did it the way weather does, slow and inevitable, offering choices that felt like hers. When she flinched at the sound of a diesel engine, I flinched inside the habit of a heart that has lost things it can't ask back. A good hour passed like a long apology. When she finally stepped toward the crate with the blanket and the half-turned, open door, it was as if she remembered that every story that starts at a road has to turn somewhere or else it's not a story, just a line laboring across a map. She looked once more at the bend, where the trees knitted together tightly enough to feel like the past. Then she chose movement. Shelter intake is bureaucracy dressed in Mercy's clothing. The fluorescent lights take the romance out of everything, which is part of their job. We weighed her and wrote numbers that mattered down as if they were passwords to the next chapter. Her paws left damp signatures on the stainless table. Her nails clicked a metronome of nerves. Dr. Rafiq's hair had given up for the day, pointing in 7 separate directions, which meant he had done the midnight emergency spay and the morning parvo run. He murmured to her in a voice that wore sleep and tenderness like the same shirt. "You walked yourself in," he said low and not to me, while listening to the clean machinery of her heart. "Now we'll help you find where to walk next." I did not name her the first week. Names attach like ivy, they climb structures and then become them. And I have learned to wait until the word knows the animal, and the animal allows the word. I called her Good Dog, because truth should be the first language a house hears itself speak. She learned the lay of the kennel, the square of sunlight at a specific hour, the guard bark that said, "I am large enough, try me," to the mop bucket that couldn't care less. The night alarms are different. Rooms breathe, metal contracts and expands. A storm of whispers finds you even when you choose to sleep. She stood a long time. It took 2 nights to teach her that lying down was not a trap. When she did, it was with the careful grace of a person not sure the chair they've been offered is sturdy. She curled and uncured and found a compromise with her bones. When her eyes finally closed, I sat beside her and stared at the shape her belief made on the blanket, and felt like I'd been let into a secret I had no right to keep. It should be a small thing, the first leash. It never is. The clip makes a sound as bright as a coin striking tile. She startles, then checks herself, then lifts her chin in the defensive pride of a creature who would prefer not to be embarrassed. Outside, the sky is a fresh bruise, swollen with evening. She moves with her head slightly low, that shepherd sway that insists on reading the world a fraction of a second before you do. We walk the perimeter the way sailors test a deck they did not build. She gathers information the way grief does, inclusively, without sorting. Because relevance is a thing you learn only after it hurts you. The leash is weight and idea. I keep it loose as a promise you plan to keep. She finds a patch of clover and stands there too long, lifting her face to a wind that smells like the road but doesn't sound like betrayal. She glances at me once, measuring, and I recognize the arithmetic. Trust is addition so slow it feels like weather, or subtraction done by someone else when you aren't looking. I tell her she's doing just fine and try to believe it loud enough for the sentence to lay down and stay. The fireworks begin on a Tuesday for no reason I can produce that would make sense to an animal who understood that light should not bang. The first snap is a question mark. The second is a nail hammered into a memory we do not get the keys to. She's on her bed with her chin on her paws, demonstrating the complicated geometry of rest when the air dents. She is standing before the clap finishes its sentence. The pupils swallow the color from her eyes. Her tail is a flag in a wind I never want to meet. I am on the floor before my mind has finished describing the situation to itself, my hand inside the officer's vest I keep for this, a human thunder shirt. She paces, a precise rectangle whose corners are my ankles, the door, the window, the door again. "You're safe?" I say, the useless phrase we offer each other when truth needs more time than panic will offer. We sit the storm together. Each boom is a hand slapping water in the dark. I push treats between her teeth. She forgets them and then finds them later as if discovering mercy catched in small shapes. When the rain fails to arrive on time, the night feels fraudulent, as if something critical has skipped a beat. She curls finally, not against me in the movie version but near me, an arm's length that says this hurts but proximity helps. When she sleeps, it looks like surrender. It is not. It is endurance wearing pajamas. The next morning, she has discovered new absences. The vacuum is, apparently, a dragon. So is the orange trash truck, the sound of a skateboard on the sidewalk, the jitter of a shopping bag. Fear is efficient. It copies itself onto anything with an available surface. We work like people correcting a rumor. I show her the vacuum off, the vacuum across the room, the vacuum moving an inch. I let her sniff it as I feed her and talk about normal things, as if we had both decided that reality is a collaborative project. She learns faster than my pride would prefer to admit. Sometimes the old instinct muscles through like a stranger in a crowd, and she stands rigid against a noise neither of us agree to like yet. And then she remembers me remembering her, and the tension leaps a circuit and dissipates, leaving only a humble warmth behind. 2 weeks in, she discovers the window over the couch. The sun pulls that square of air every afternoon, and then settles there with both feet, and she stacks herself neatly into the light with a sigh that makes my body choose to relax as well. When she dreams, her paws hatch the air with tiny running that is the body's way of keeping practice when life has forgotten to be dangerous. People say they love the part of a rescue story where the animal begins to love back, as if affection is a light switch and not a cathedral built by 100 invisible decisions. It happens in a hallway between the kitchen and the front door, a thin place where breaths tangle up. She has a ball in her mouth, one battered enough to carry the odor of all the moments it has survived. She approaches slowly, eyeing my hands as if I might demand too much. I do the opposite. I look away and say something to the sink. She places the ball on my foot, not beside. A degree of precision so gentle it makes my chest ache. I do not make a show of it. I roll it back lazily with the side of my shoe, and when she pounces, a kitten shakes its tail inside the body of a soldier. The world reconfigures itself without checking with either of us. We play that way for 10 full minutes, two dignified creatures pretending they are not delighted in case delight gets offended and leaves. It is not linear, which is another way of saying it is honest. On garbage day she fails every test and spends an hour behind the couch, cursing in a language that consists of low moans and unapologetic trembling. On day 19 she sees a motorcycle and laughs in the face of physics, trotting like a parade down the street as if engines were the rumor this whole time. She learns her name, Mira, first when I sing it to her making eggs, and then when I whisper it into the trench between her eyes where the brow deepens into a thought big enough to carry my own. Mira, because she mirrors what you bring to her, because the future is a mirage unless you decide it is not. She comes when I call it because I have not used it to do anything but open doors and slice apples and choose joy. At night, I leave the hallway light on not for me, but for the memory of the person she waited for beside the road. I cannot give her that back. I can place a warm square of safety in the dark and tell the past to hunt elsewhere. Trust's strangest test arrives disguised as ordinary weather. A storm moves through at dinner. The sky squints down, the pressure changes key. Lightning stitches the horizon with thread too bright. She keeps eating. A soldier who learned the exact measure of concern by watching someone else pretend first. The first thunderboom sends a shiver down her flank, and she glances at the door where leaving used to be. I am cutting carrots like a person driving carefully through snow. You're okay, I say, not because it changes physics, but because saying it out loud teaches my body to proceed accordingly. She watches me watch the knife and doesn't flinch when light dents the room. A minute later she is on the rug, her chin on my sock. When the loudest clap arrives ungenerously late, we both lift our heads in unison, then dismiss it like a movie that asks too much. I do not applaud. I do not shower her with praise like confetti. I breathe out slowly an offering, and let the moment do its work inside her where I can't see what it builds, and that is the point. The call comes on a Saturday. A woman whose voice has the steady warmth of a good kettle asks about Mira. She says she saw something in the way Mira's shoulders relaxed around my niece in a photograph and wondered if that could be a daily thing at her house. I ask for the details that have nothing to do with stones and fences and everything to do with time's shape. How will Mira spend her mornings when no one is in the mood for excellence? What does the house sound like when disappointment is folding laundry? How do you grieve in your family, loudly or beneath the sink? She answers the way people do when they have decided not to be impressive. She describes a back garden with a plum tree that insists on bearing fruit, even though the raccoons have unionized. She mentions a husband who thinks he doesn't like dogs, but tells a story in which he has loved at least 3. She says she works from home and would like to learn the language Mira already speaks so fluently. Quiet. They come on a day the sky chooses the color of a pearl. Mira stands at the threshold considering everything. The young boy pauses and kneels without looking at her, like someone who has been taught you receive better when you don't reach. Mira inhaled him head to toe from a respectful distance and then stepped forward, absorbing his particular brand of child hum. The sugar, the adventure. The 3 scrapes on one knee. He makes no sound I need to translate for her. He simply breathes and waits, and the room takes a breath with him. Mira places her head under his hand as if making a decision that the rest of the day will now honor. The woman, Aisha, and I speak in the tones people use at funerals and museums. We are protecting something precious by not looking at it directly. We sit on the floor because chairs are a power we do not need. Mira lies between us with the old soldier's vigilance and the new poet's peace. I want the movie version to write itself here, but I have to tell you the truth. They do not take her that day. I ask them not to. Adoption is not a glamour. It is a contract with the ordinary. We plan another meeting. We fail to sleep well because we are all children with stockings hung too. Over the week, I teach Mera the word home the way you teach sit and down, only with your whole face. I say it when I point at the kitchen and another kind of home. When I point at the truck and the old road we will drive past and refuse to reenact. The final test arrives like a trick. I open the front door to let the boy take Mira's leash for a walk to the car. And something in the slant of the light, some perfect angle, turns the path into the county road for a heartbeat. I see her body remember. The leash is a thought, the open air a pulse in her ear. She tilts, just slightly, toward east and the trees and a bend that doesn't actually exist here. That's all. Then she looks up at me and blinks, slow as a yes. The boy says nothing. He does not even tighten his hand. Aisha stands with her palms open, which is the shape hope makes when it is doing its job correctly. Mira chooses not to go back to a story that no longer owes her anything. She steps forward into the car and sits as if understanding that useful journeys require sitting. The boy grins into his ribs and not at her, and I think, you tiny genius, you've already learned the honor of not making a moment feel like a performance. People ask if it is difficult. The leaving. The after, the way the house your mouth had arranged its sentences around suddenly, doesn't have a name breathing in the corner. I tell them it's like taking off a heavy coat your shoulders had forgotten existed, and then stepping into winter. You are lighter and colder and some stubborn. Essential part of you argues with both improvements. I fold her blanket, the one with her fur woven into it, with an honesty that lint rollers cannot negotiate. I put her bowl in the cupboard, because I cannot bear the emptiness of it staring at me like judgment on the floor. I allow the couch to look too tidy for a few days. I go to the shelter and make coffee in a pot that has been nursing its bitterness since 2012. I tape a photo of Mira to the board and write her new name under it and draw a small heart that looks like a first grader made it, because that is the level of skill I have left. They send updates without punctuation because sometimes joy forgets grammar and who am I to correct it? The boy reading on the floor, his hand tangled in her ruff, their heads making an accidental halo together. Mira supervising plum jam production like a small foreman wave in a factory staged by children. Mira asleep with her mouth open in a smile, a fact I would have argued was anthropomorphism until I saw it with my adult incredulity. In one, it's raining. The reasonable rain of a city behaving itself, and she sits at the window with her chin on the sill, watching the road. Not the old road. The one outside the house where people she loves leave and come back again with bread and mail and stories about being late. She watches with attention that is not anxious but thorough. The door opens, Aisha steps in, shaking an umbrella into a bowl that is smarter than all of us. Myra stands and does not panic. She does not scan for abandonment. She lifts her head and walks to meet her person like someone who knows the equation now, who has learned the shape of the day. Some nights I drive past the place on the county road where the world pretended to end. The ditch is taller with summer and then shaved low with winter's blunt blade. The hawk still owns the pole. Someone has taken the blanket, the bowl is gone. It looks like any piece of road that minds its own business until called upon to host a kindness. I pull over anyway, because ritual is one of our species' better tricks. I sit on the hood and drink coffee that is more honest than good. I say her name into the small weather. I say, Mira, and I say, you did it. And the wind doesn't learn English, but it knows intention when it hears it. Sometimes it rains, and sometimes it doesn't, and most of the time the sky is only itself, which is useful. I think about the first posture she held, the one that seemed like prayer and obstinance married into a chair no one could get her out of, and I think about the last posture I saw before they drove away. The sitting tall, the looking straight ahead, the not asking for any guarantee except the one the boy's hand offered, warm and firm on the leash. She kept looking at the road for so long, not because she preferred grief to grace, but because the body repeats what it has rehearsed until someone teaches it a better play. We gave her a stage without realizing that's what floors and sidewalks and porch rugs become when an animal decides to write a life on them. She took our offerings, the blanket, the chicken, the word, home, and sorted them with a competence that made my pride smaller and truer. In the end, she did what good hearts do when given the smallest possible reliable light. She moved toward it. On the first night she slept in their house, a storm that couldn't quite commit pressed a palm against the windows and then withdrew. She dreamed, pause, kicking lazy punctuation into the bed. The boy made the faint, talking sounds children make when they are negotiating with dragons in their sleep. Aisha left a lamp on in the hall, a gentle moon for domesticated wolves, and stood watching the rectangle of light fill the door like a promise held open. When she turned it off, the dark didn't feel like absence. It felt like a larger room. And somewhere among the quiet furniture, a clock ticked not toward endings but toward morning, which is the oldest trick hope knows. That's how I like to close the story when anyone asks, standing at my porch where the evening peels itself back inch by inch to show the darker layer that has been waiting. I don't apologize for the way my voice changes around the last part. I let it. The road is still there, yes, and if you stand long enough you will see a dozen small acts of leaving and returning that have nothing to do with pain. A mail truck, a neighbor with a cake, a boy who has learned to look both ways, a dog who has decided that the door is not a threat, but a bell that rings to announce kindness arriving precisely on time. The road has forgotten her name, but she hasn't forgotten its sound. Every night, when the wind moves through the grass just right, it carries the faint hum of passing cars, and she still turns her head, just for a heartbeat, to look. But what used to be longing has changed into something gentler, curiosity, maybe even peace. Mira no longer waits by the old ditch. Now she watches from the porch of her new home, the glow of the porch light reflecting in her amber eyes. Inside, laughter moves through the house like a soft breeze. The boy's voice rises, his shoes tapping against the wooden floor, and she lifts her ears, tail flicking once in recognition. She's learned that footsteps here always come back. That door's open for love, not departure. When it rains, she lies near the window, her chin on the sill, eyes tracing droplets that race each other down the glass. Aisha sometimes sits beside her with a mug of tea, resting her hand on Mira's neck without saying a word. There's no need. The silence between them carries more truth than language ever could. The shared understanding of what it means to have been left and still choose to trust again. Sometimes I still drive past the bend in that county road, where the weeds now stand taller and the bowl that once held her hope is long gone. The air always smells like wet earth and endings. But I don't feel sadness anymore, only gratitude. Because that's where she taught me something no book or sermon ever could. Love isn't measured by who stays, but by the courage it takes to open your heart again after loss. One evening Aisha sent me a photo. The boy was reading on the couch, Mira curled beside him, her paw draped over his leg like she was holding the moment in place. Outside the window, the world looked washed and new. I didn't need words. The image said everything. That she had finally stopped watching for someone to return because she had found where she belonged. I think about her every time it rains. I think about that first night when the storm drowned everything except the sound of her breath, steady and waiting. And I think about the way she finally stepped away from the road, how the act of moving forward, however small, can rewrite an entire life. The truth is, she kept looking at the road not because she wanted the past to come back, but because she was waiting for the future to arrive. And when it did, it came softly, in the voice of a child, the warmth of a home, and the quiet certainty of being loved again. Sometimes, when the world feels too heavy, I whisper her name into the rain. Mira, I say, you made it home.